Vernon Hall, Chapter 14. The Cabin by the Sea. The entire week that followed Ezekiel Lloyd's visit to Vernon Hall seemed like an infinity. I was waiting and yearning for an opportunity to escape Bertha's watchful eye. Hugo usually took Sundays off, and so I knew it had to be a Sunday. After Bertha and I finished dinner, I pretended to feel tired and retired to my bedchamber early. Bertha also retired early. When the clock struck midnight, I surreptitiously crept out of the house. According to what Ezekiel had told me, his cabin was not too far from Vernon Hall, and one could travel to the cave by foot. I therefore didn't require the carriage. The night sky was heavily sprinkled with enchanting stars, and the nocturnal breeze was gentle and pleasant. I climbed down the cliffs, and though it was a laborious task, managed to reach the serene shores of Whitstable. The silver moon peeked from behind an array of puffy clouds. Though I still limped, I walked on as fast as I could, lest Bertha would awaken and notice my absence. I eventually reached the cave and saw the small, dark cabin beside it. A lantern hung outside, casting an orange glow on the veranda, just as Ezekiel had described. I knocked on the damp wooden door. I found it difficult to control my exhilaration. I fixed my brooch several times and felt my hair to see if the winds had ruffled my bun. After a few more knocks, Ezekiel answered the door. He wasn't as well dressed as he had been on previous occasions. He wore only a shabby white shirt with suspenders and trousers. His silky dark hair, which was usually neatly brushed, was disheveled, and he had stubble on his pale face. I immediately discerned a sense of both exhaustion and exasperation. He greeted me coldly and asked me to step inside. The interior was unkempt and cold. There was a small hearth, but it wasn't lit. At the far corner of the room was a small bed with linens untidily strewn across it, and close to the main door was a desk hidden beneath masses of files. In truth, I didn't feel welcome. I'm sorry for having disturbed you, Ezekiel. I didn't realize you were working on something, I said, feeling a little disappointed. I also noticed an empty wine bottle on the floor, and given Ezekiel's disorderly physical state, I realized he was probably inebriated. Working? He scoffed. What would I be working on? They've taken everything away from me. His deep voice dropped to a growl, and he shoved some of the files off the table. I was horrified and deeply saddened. I could never have imagined Ezekiel in such a temper. He stood upright, his back toward me, and I tried to calm him. Who has Ezekiel? Pray do tell me. I would like to help you. He whirled and pulled me forcefully to him with a firm grip. You're just a girl, a young, naive girl. You cannot help me, Eleanor, he barked. My heart was racing, and my eyes grew misty. Ezekiel must have detected this, for he loosened his grip, and his glare transformed into a sentimental look. I'm sorry, Eleanor. Things have changed during my absence. It is all too much for me to take. I apologize for frightening you, he said softly and released me from his grip. There was an uneasy silence for a moment. I could only hear the waves crashing, and then I spoke. Ezekiel, you can trust me. Maybe I can help you somehow. What has happened? He scratched his cheek and stared blankly into space before he finally spoke, his eyes downcast. They took my house in my absence, all my possessions. I'm practically penniless, and the list goes on and on. He waved his arms in a drunken manner. Ezekiel, I'm so sorry to hear that. I know of a solicitor. He is Amelia's family solicitor, in fact, a Mr. Bartholomew. Perhaps he can help you. Ezekiel was silent. He narrowed his eyes and clenched his jaws, deep in thought. No, Eleanor. I told you, I've become a recluse. I don't wish to see anyone. What's gone is gone. It's just that life is unfair at times, and so one loses their patience. In truth, I hate solicitors. I don't require anyone's assistance. I resumed. Ezekiel, it pains me to see you like this. If you want money, I could give you some. Amelia left me with a monthly allowance of £10. I could share that money with you if you like. I spoke naively, almost desperately, not wanting to lose the man I loved. Ezekiel stared at me intently. His hazel eyes softened and his pale cheeks flushed. He approached me tenderly and gently embraced me. You are the kindest and sweetest soul I've ever met, Eleanor. No, I don't want your money. He caressed my cheek and I sighed. Ezekiel had calmed down a little and his face had relaxed. Well, enough of all this. This isn't why I had asked you to come to my cabin, to see me in such a mess. Come, I shall take you out into the sea. I couldn't believe my ears. I had never been out into the untamed sea, never with Amelia, never with father, and it was something I had always yearned for. Tell me I'm not imagining this, I said. He grasped my shoulders jovially and beamed. No, you are not dreaming, Eleanor. Come, let's go. We sat in a small wooden boat, and he rowed the oars himself. The sea was silver for as long as the eye could see, a vastness of unexplored dreams, and the only beacon in the dark night was a luminous moon. There was a gentle breeze, and Ezekiel rowed for almost an hour until the town of Whitstable was nothing more than a distant memory. I could see the cliffs from the boat, but they appeared tiny. Ezekiel stopped rowing and moved to sit beside. It's a beautiful night, isn't it? He exclaimed. I couldn't look to the night sky, for I beheld something ever more breathtaking beside me, and so I exclaimed, Indeed, everything is beautiful about this night. He looked into my eyes for a moment and smiled, but there was a touch of sadness in it. What is it, Ezekiel? I remember the days I went out into the sea at night, from the shores of Whitstable, I mean. It seems so long ago. He exhaled sharply. I too have many memories. It is unfortunate, but everything beautiful in my life has come to an abrupt end. He looked at me sentimentally, then held my hand and recited a poem. What is my dream? I have many, it would seem. But there is one favorite fantasy which fills my heart with ecstasy. I'm on a wooden boat which gently floats along a silver lake. I wonder whether I am asleep or awake. My world is illuminated by the sensual moonlight. Nothing else can bring me joy but such a night. And I am not alone. You are here with me. There is an ethereal serenity that makes me feel so free. Everything else is a blankness. Your enchanting face is all that glows like the flame of a candle in the dark. I was overwhelmed by Ezekiel's deep and romantic intellect, and I wondered if he had written the poem himself. He laughed. I'm not so dull, Eleanor. Just because I'm a doctor doesn't mean I don't have a poet's soul. I wrote that poem a long time ago. It's beautiful, Ezekiel. It makes me feel it makes me feel so alive, I exclaimed ecstatically. He laughed again. Strangely enough, that's what Scarlett said. He paused. I was baffled. Scarlett? Who's Scarlett? I asked timidly. Ezekiel grew silent for a moment and gazed into the darkness of the night. He ran his hand through his disheveled hair and said, Scarlett was my patient, Eleanor. She was the woman who killed herself. I had written the poem for her. She was trapped in an asylum and could never leave. That's the least I could do for her. He grew forlorn. I felt a deep sense of compassion and empathy for Ezekiel. Indeed, the tragedy that had befallen his patient was a painful one. Do you still love her? I asked carefully, rather fearful of the answer I was about to receive. He thought over it for a few seconds, then responded nonchalantly, No, no, I don't. He looked at me intently. Ezekiel, I have to tell you something. Amelia wasn't troubled as you describe her to be. I too have seen something at Vernon Hall, and so has Bertha. Amelia didn't imagine things. What have you seen? He furrowed his brow and peered at me curiously. The ghost of a woman. She is angry and malicious. I believe her to be the evil monk's mistress. As I finished my explanation, Ezekiel cackled. I was a little disappointed as I found the subject of the parlourmaid to be anything but amusing. When he noticed the seriousness on my face, he covered his mouth with his hand and said, Eleanor, the evil monks didn't have a mistress. I have heard stories of necromancy being practiced by them. I interrupted him. Amelia told me the same, Ezekiel, but this woman is not a victim. She is the ghost of a parlourmaid in a black uniform, Ezekiel interjected. Well, there you go. There wouldn't have been parlourmaids with black uniforms a couple of centuries ago, Eleanor. He laughed. I continued, and she wears a pearl necklace with a black ribbon. Upon hearing this, Ezekiel grew silent and gulped. He again stared blankly at the stars. He breathed heavily, then asked in a serious tone, Eleanor, how would a parlourmaid get hold of a pearl necklace? I don't know, Ezekiel. That's what's troubling me and Bertha. You're just anxious, Eleanor. It's because of Amelia's death and her embalmment. The death of a loved one can damage one's mind very gravely, he said mournfully. I grasped his arm. Ezekiel, what I saw was very real. It wasn't because I was mourning. Before I could speak further, the beautiful man with long eyelashes, skin as pale as the moon, and lustrous eyes more enchanting than stars, pulled me to him and kissed my lips. Time had stopped, so it seemed. The universe came to a halt. I closed my eyes and cherished the moment. Realizing he had perhaps gone too far, he withdrew his hand and rubbed his eyes. I'm sorry, Eleanor. I don't seem to be thinking clearly. I think I've had far too much to drink earlier on, and I think it is excessively late. I interjected. You don't have to apologize, Ezekiel. I have been in love with you from the day I met you. He watched me intently, something he often did, and then said, I love you too, Eleanor. But I ought to get you back to Vernon Hall before Bertha wakes. I wouldn't want her to worry about you. Though I didn't want that moment to come to an end, I concurred with Ezekiel. I felt a little guilty for being alone with a man without Bertha's knowledge, but the love I had for Ezekiel Lloyd grew ever more in my heart from that moment on. When we arrived back at the shores, Ezekiel checked his pocket watch. It was past 3 in the morning. By this time, I was in a bit of a panic, thinking of Bertha's reaction if she discovered where I was and whom I was with. Moreover, I felt guilty as I hadn't been in the dungeon to see Amelia the entire day. I noticed Ezekiel's strides grew sluggish, and his hazel eyes were rosy as he had constantly been rubbing them. The wine he had consumed some hours ago was now taking a toll on him. I decided to return to Vernon Hall on my own, lest he collapsed on his way back, or worse, if Bertha were to see me with him. Are you certain you'll manage on your own, Eleanor? He inquired sleepily, still rubbing his eyes. I nodded. As I turned to leave, Ezekiel gently took hold of my arm and pulled me toward him, whispering in my ear, I'll come to see you again. He then walked in the direction of his cabin. As I was about to ascend the cliffs, I saw a man standing at the very top, where I had once stood to see father. He stared at me. It was pitch dark save for the moonlight, and so I peered at the man to decipher his identity. I realized it was Gareth and he disappeared. I wonder whether Gareth had been following me or whether he was fortuitously about for a nocturnal walk. In any case, I hurried back home. The return journey was even more laborious as I had to climb the cliffs with my limp, and the night air had become quite chilly. When I finally reached the premises, I searched for the main door key in my handbag. It was very dark and my fingers couldn't find it. Then I heard something that sounded like an echo. I whirled around to see where the noise had come from. Hello? Is anybody there? But there was no answer. All I heard were the chirping of crickets and the crash of the waves. Then an eerie draft enveloped me, and I heard the rustle of leaves. I entered the Italian garden and whispered, Gareth, is that you? But there was no answer. A haunting sense of insecurity fell upon me. For a few moments, an ominous silence crept through the trees. I trembled, not knowing what exactly I was afraid of, and took a step toward the house. But just as I did, I heard a voice. I was horrified. I looked around but was unable to see anything. I heard the voice again and deciphered it to be a woman's voice coming from the secret garden. I limped into it, my heart fluttering with trepidation. There, beneath the ominously pale moon, stood the parlour maid. Her black hair flowed, her lips were ever more crimson than they had been, and she bore a sinister grin, her fiery eyes blazing. I was thunderstruck, my mouth fell open, and my body trembled uncontrollably. I froze, not knowing whether to flee or to confront her. I was paralyzed with fear. She walked toward me and echoed. You have taken what is mine. Before I could respond or run, the devil of a woman attacked me. She seized my throat and I fell to the ground. Her grip was like fire and my skin burned. I choked as my feeble arms attempted to grapple with her, but she was too strong. I kicked my legs, hoping I would topple her over. But it was in vain. She cackled and her grip grew ever more powerful. I felt my body becoming lifeless when I discerned another voice, a masculine one. Eleanor! Eleanor! Get away from her! The apparition's grip was gone. I wheezed and coughed painfully, my throat still burning from her grasp. Eleanor, are you all right? Who was that? Cried Gareth. I could hardly speak and was on the verge of fainting when I heard Bertha squeal and cry. Oh my! What has happened? Who did this to you, miss? The last thing I recalled was Gareth lowering a lantern and exposing my neck to Bertha, who covered her mouth with her hands to muffle a scream, and Garrett's terror-stricken eyes. Oh my God, look at these marks. I saw someone strangling her, ma'am. I saw her with my own eyes, he cried hysterically. I lost consciousness.